What was child labor during the British Industrial Revolution? The term child labor refers to children who worked to produce a good or a service which could be sold for money in the marketplace, regardless of whether they were paid for their work. Was child labor new? Previously, children of poor and working-class families worked to help around the house or with their family business, but since the British Industrial Revolution, children have been forced to work in factories and other places for many extensive hours. How is urban industrial revolution child labor different from what had come before? The idea of children working had differed in the Industrial Revolution because their jobs now had much harsher and more dangerous conditions, and it was much more common than before. Children started working in mines and factories, and they had very dangerous safety conditions there. What was life like for a child laborer? Life for a child laborer was brutal and harsh. Children usually started working from the age of 5, and they often died by age 18. They worked for 12 hours plus and suffered from lack of sleep, and there was a definite lack of safety in their working conditions. Also, there were high levels of malnutrition and abuse. A brief example of the life of a child laborer was Crabtree. Crabtree was a child laborer during the British Industrial Revolution, and he worked since the age of 8. He worked 16 hours a day from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m., and he reported that he was most commonly beaten if he was ever late to work. How did laws eventually limit child labor? Pessimists such as Alfred, Engels, Marx, and Webb argued that children worked under deplorable conditions and were being exploited by the industrialists. Optimists, on the other hand, argued that the employment of children in these factories was beneficial to the child, family, and country, and that the conditions were no worse than they had been on farms, in cottages, or chimneys. Child labor reform laws were called Factory Acts and occurred in the early 1800s and mostly affected children working in textile mills. The Cotton Factories Regulation Act of 1819 reduced the child's workday to 12 hours maximum and forbid children under 8 or 9 to work in cotton mills. And later, the 10 Hours Bill of 1847 limited the child's or woman's workday to 10 hours. Since the laws were not generally enforced, the regulation of child labor law made it so that inspector teams were sent out to factories and mines in the 1830s and 1840s to make sure they were being carried out. Eventually, laws were passed that required the children to be educated.